if there's an early stage startup and they have been a PLG first company or a PLG native company, they have been very encouraged with a lot of signups, but they don't see the revenue. Should they continue the path, or should they go figure out a way to go an SLG motion parallelly as well? Of course, constraints are probably around investments or raising money, raising capital, and so on and so forth. What would be your advice on that?
Yeah, I think you have to do a little triage on why that is or isn't happening. And the first counsel I would give is patience. There are a lot of companies and executives and board members in a lot of companies that say, hey, the PLG's been the motion for a quarter. How come things aren't working? Guess what? It takes longer than that. In my view, it takes at least 6 months for the motion to start to take hold. And that assumes that the company is doing enough on awareness and driving demand and all of that, which many of them don't because of the marketing spend stuff we talked about. So that's one issue. But if you are doing all that and you're still not seeing conversions, then I think you have to look at...
Good morning, good evening. Welcome to Thrivecast. On our today's podcast, we have the famed David Yockelson from Gartner, and we are here to talk about the trends and insights on the product-led growth. Before we jump into the topic, a little bit about our guest. David is a distinguished VP analyst and a Gartner fellow on technology go-to-market. Gartner, as many of you might know, is a wise owl helping businesses make smarter decisions. I have been a client of Gartner in my previous companies for almost about 6 to 8 years now, so I've been very familiar with Gartner, although I am not right now a current client. I know some of you might ask, how did me and David meet? Well, we met on this online dating website for professionals called LinkedIn. And David used to share a lot of stories on LinkedIn a lot. And I've been a fanboy of his posts on product-led growth and recently on interactive demos. My pet peeve, though, with David and his posts is he always points me to a Gartner client site, which I don't have enough access to. But although he's now slowly starting to convince me that I should become a client. There's a lot of buzzwords that David is associated with: product positioning, value to customers, GTM challenges, sales and channel enablement, pricing plans, and very recently with interactive demos and product-led growth. Of the many things that we have that David can talk about, we're going to talk more about the trends and insights into product-led growth. David, welcome. Hope I did not butcher your introduction or make it too casual. How are you?
No, Guru Raj, that was fantastic. And appreciate the shout outs and your intent to become a Gartner client. We as capitalists like that. So that's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So David, could you tell us a little more about some of the spicy trends and insights on what's happening in the PLG world? I know in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of discussion. PLG became a fanboy, big buzzword. LinkedIn caught on fire with PLG. And then after some time, it started plateauing. A lot of companies started to embrace more and more of the SLG, and the PLG companies who were primarily PLG companies, they started investing more in the SLG. Could you tell our audience a little about what is PLG? Is it here to stay? What trends do you see out there?
Yeah, you pegged the really quick history of the PLG impetus, if you want to put it that way. And I would add, I think that there were many PLG native companies that figured out that they actually had to have salespeople talking to buyers to sell large deals. And conversely, you had and have larger companies, established companies that kind of poo-pooed the PLG movement and go-to-market motion as, oh, it's for those startup people, but have realized that there's something there. And I think we're all meeting in the middle in a hybrid go-to-market mode and motion primarily. And it's not that strict or pure PLG, like we can talk about what that means, but there's still going to be instances where you're going to have a self-serve experience for users or buyers end-to-end. They're going to be very rare in B2B, but you're going to have them. And you're going to have experiences from the other direction that are going to be predominantly sales-led. But neither motion is going to exist without the other. My view of the world is, in a couple of years, this is SaaS go-to-market. We're not going to be making distinctions like we are now between product-led and sales-led, and they're different worlds. The hybrid motion, and more importantly, the hybrid signals that marketers and sellers need to deal with to figure out who are the best and right accounts and how do we approach them and when do we approach them, are going to be at the center of all of that.
So maybe to jump into a little bit of that, maybe let me pick your brain on couple of insights or statistics. What do you think would be the current adoption rate for B2B SaaS companies? Whatever your definition of PLG is, what's the PLG
Yeah.
adoption for these B2B companies? Is it maybe Gartner might have a number, but is it more than 50%, less than
Yes.
50%, less than 10%? What do you think?
It's greater than 50%, and it's probably less than 75 or 80%. So there was a number that we had seen. In fact, I think Gainsight had a number beginning of last year that was 58%. And that jibed with what we had been seeing and hearing as well. Some of this, I think, is going to be dependent upon how one defines PLG, but leave that for a moment. I think my virtual phone or video application conferencing has been ringing off the hook. And I would say, yeah, that number of around 75% right now is probably accurate for SaaS companies doing something akin to a product-led motion or applying what I would call PLG tactics.
Got it. And does this number is only for large companies using PLG or maybe just public companies, or it's across the board, all
No.
B2B SaaS companies?
Across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah, just law of large numbers says there are many more smaller companies than larger companies.
Mm-hmm.
And the clients that I speak with range from 0 to trillions, or in market cap anyway. But because there are so many more small companies, the volume of those companies that have taken on PLG tactics and PLG motion are probably larger than the bigger ones. And for the bigger ones, I think it's an interesting thing just to think about and realize that if you're a large company with a portfolio of 10 products, not all of them are going to fit in a PLG motion. All of them may be able to benefit from PLG tactics and ways of reducing friction in the buying process and all of that. But even the large companies have increasingly been making bets for some of those products with a PLG motion for a variety of different reasons.
I think maybe could you tell a little more about what do you mean by PLG, maybe from your standpoint or from a Gartner standpoint? I know there's a lot of checkboxes. There's a lot of articles about, hey, there's like 8, 9 things that needs to be done to become PLG. What do you think would be at least the top maybe 4 or 5 of them?
Yeah. So I think first it's really useful to start with the semantics and definition of what do we think it means? And then the question is, how do you do that? So PLG starts with the P and the L. It's product led. It means to me that the first interaction that account intending to purchase something has with your organization is your product, notwithstanding following a CTA or seeing something on LinkedIn. But rather than have a first interaction with a seller, the first interaction is a product experience. And I use the term product experience purposely because it's not the case that every SaaS product can be used in a self-serve motion. So you can't always have a free trial. You can't always have a freemium. Not everybody wants to be open source. It could be interactive demo, could be sandbox, could be a variety of things. But that experience is the first way that account and typically users in that account get to see what you can do and hopefully get to see the value that your product can offer. So that's my very basic definition. And then I'm going to give you the crummy analyst, it depends answer. So depending upon that product and audience combination that you have, how you or what you decide to do in the PLG motion will depend on whether you can make a free offer, a user or an account can see value in that free offer in a period of time, whether you've actually built the product in such a way that you can section off pieces of it for a gated freemium and on. So those are the basic components.
Got it. Let me try to see if I've understood. What you're saying is that if a product is enabling the customers to find value in whatever mechanisms that it can display itself, could be interactive demo, could be free trial, could be freemium or sign up or self-serve, in whatever mechanism that it is. And that's one class of products which, that the customer or the buyer does not have to talk to the sales guy, right? And they experience the value by doing any of these tactics, right? That's what you mean by what is PLG. And the businesses, of course, can run their own tactics on whether they want to have premium, free trial, reverse trial, or so many of them. Super. I think once we have established what is PLG and that percentage or the adoption rate seems to be decent if you consider all of these together, put together. Could you share a little more about, is this trend a trend of the users experiencing the value of the product without talking to sales? Is that here to stay? Is it a secular trend,
Yeah.
or is it just a passing trend?
It's here to stay, I was making a note on what I thought would make sense next, and you introduced it perfectly. So it's really useful to think about this in terms of how buyers operate and how they want to operate. One side of this is the tech company or the SaaS company saying, I need to be in market and I need to get my product introduced this way and I need to go to market this way. We want to listen to buyers and how they want to buy. And we know, and I'm sure everybody listening to this has heard the stats, many of which come from Gartner, that say that people desire a rep-free experience. Nobody really wants to talk to a seller first. They will later on, but as a first instance or as a first introduction to a company or a product, they want to do their own work. And as the age of the buyers decreases, as the technical ability of those buyers increases, they want to see and experience that value for themselves. And by the way, a lot of this, another it depends. When you have a very technical audience, the propensity for that being able to touch and feel and see value goes way up. When you don't have a technical audience, it's not necessarily the same thing. However, when the deal sizes go up, then I guess a couple of things happen. One is you still want to win over user advocates through that first product experience, but you then have to be prepared also to shift that over to dealing with sales. So one part of this is, how do buyers want to operate? They want to operate without having to step through the weeks and months and handoffs and SDRs and BDRs and all of that. The second thing is that there are lots of SaaS products out there. There are a lot of very similar sounding SaaS products out there. It's really hard to get the attention of buyers. And I would argue that with rare exception, it's going to be near impossible to get buyer attention strictly in a sales-led, top-down kind of a motion. I talk to so many companies that say, yeah, we want to go after the CEO or the CRO or the CMO. Dude, you're not getting them on the phone or on the video. And even if you did, you're going to have 20 seconds to try to figure out what to say in a cold call or a cold email to get their attention and differentiate and hit some urgency, and it's really difficult. So product-led is at the very least the way to get somebody's attention, get an account's attention, start to gain advocacy and show value quickly and more easily, in my view.
So I'm trying to probably over-trivialize it in my head. What you're saying is awareness and acquisition are really good candidates for PLG motions, but for non-technical audience who may not necessarily be able to go activate by their own, or for that matter, convert their own, or they may not understand the value of their own, that's where humans come into play. That's where sales-led might come into play.
I think particularly when you get to large deal sizes, if you look at some of the PLG poster children's success stories, you see very collaborative, very business user-oriented kinds of things. Slack, Figma, Miro, all of those. And they've been PLG success stories, but it's one thing to gain the user advocates. And low code is another area where it has its own built-in virality. It spreads like wildfire. But at some point, either the size of the deal that the vendor wants to close is big enough, or the application becomes critical enough or noisy enough that another entity that isn't the user says, hey, I need to control this. That's when it has to shift out of strictly self-serve and product over to, now we need a seller's intervention to do a variety of different things, explain the value, help build a business case, reduce risk, make sense, all of that. And I'll add one more thing to that. I'm sorry, just before I think it's interesting to note that there are, I think the number is somewhere around 67 to 70% of all tech purchases have regret associated with them. And I love to juxtapose that with the 70+% of buyers that don't want to deal with sellers first and want a rep-free experience. Those two things don't go together. So there's value in the rep experience, but it has to be at the right time with the right information and helping the buyer, an exclamation point, along at that point when they're ready.
That makes sense. I think to the listeners, we'll probably add show notes to the PLG penetration. I know OpenView and Kyle Poyer have put in a lot of effort into which industries, which personas prefer more of a PLG versus SLG. We'll talk about that. This is new to me. 70% of the buyers have a regret. And maybe that's why they want to probably try out, buy small before they buy big. So this is new. And maybe, David, if you can share something offline and we can add it to the show notes as well.
Sure.
Here's a follow-up question, David. If PLG were a great tool for maybe acquisition, awareness, but yet, if you look at the SaaS metrics across the board, if you look at the S&M spend, especially at large public companies or even large private companies in Series B, Series C, and above, their S&M spend is constantly now increasing. Growth is decreasing. Does that indicate that most of the larger SaaS or tech companies are focused on acquiring customers through SLG? Why is the spend increasing so much? What's the divergence then?
So we saw last year the marketing budgets decrease 1 to 2 percentage points. I think prior to that, the average that we had seen was marketing spend anyway, 8.5% of revenue. So it went down. We think it'll recover. First of all, we can have a lengthy discussion about how well or even if most tech companies appreciate marketing and whether the marketing organizations do a good job at defending the spend and showing ROI and all of that. But if you think about the last couple of years, it's been really hard to find your buyer. Nobody's in an office, much more competition, need to drive awareness, all of those things. It's also reflected in a lot of the calls that I get that aren't just about marketing, but about, hey, our sales cycle is this long. It needs to be that long. How do we fix that? Or we've got N different accounts in the funnel or in the loop if you're a PLG company or whatever, and they're not converting. How do we fix it? You can throw budget awareness. You can throw budget at the vehicles that you can use to try to get people to convert or get them to the meeting or all of that. But, and this is where I think PLG tactics come in, by the way, not just for new customer acquisition, but for expansion and growth for existing customers. Yep. We should talk about that in a second. Interactive demo technology that you mentioned that I look at, to me, that everything is a nail and that's the hammer, because I think it's technology that helps sales-led companies that can't have a free trial show off the value of their product. It helps PLG companies get people into free trials when they have them. It helps drive engagement within the free trials, a variety of other stuff. That kind of thing is where I certainly think we're going to see more spend. And then there's the whole world of Gen AI and how it helps go to market and which aspects of go to market and does it drive efficiency. And there's obviously spend there as well.
Yeah. So maybe for some of the day, we can keep the marketing, the SaaS growth, and all the interactive demos. Coming back to a topic on the trends and insights on PLG, do you see, in the interest of time, maybe let me ask you a few questions, maybe in a rapid fire. Do you see that PLG being used mostly for, if it's a new early stage startup, is PLG the de facto that you're seeing out there in the market? Yes, no?
Just volume of calls and conversations I have, I would say yes. I would certainly say that the number of instances of, hey, we think we should have a PLG motion, how do we do it, far outnumber the which salespeople should I hire.
That makes sense, maybe because investor spend is also on a decrease. So at what stage do you think that these startups start thinking about PLG plus SLG? I'm not talking about like the founder-led growth. Founders are trying to become sales guys. At what point in time when they hire their first sales guy, regardless of whether it is an AE or a RSM or a manager or a director, whatever that might be, but someone outside of the founding team, what stage when they talk about PLG versus SLG?
In terms of investment stage, it's probably somewhere between Series A, Series B level.
Oh, that late. Okay.
It depends what your sales contingent is. And I'm hesitating because the answer is going to be different depending upon your product and audience combinations. If you have a really complex product that doesn't lend itself to a free trial, that kind of thing, and you by definition have to be sales led, then my investment is going to be what sort of salespeople make the most sense, but also how do I make them really effective through the use of PLG tactics. The reverse would be if I've got an identity and access management or endpoint management or whatever application that lends itself to a PLG motion, at what point and what type of salespeople do I need to close larger deals or manage accounts more effectively?
Yep,
that
that makes sense.
could be pretty early, but
Yeah, that makes sense. Is the reverse happening as well? Meaning an early stage startup, regardless of the fact whether their setup is complex or the product is not, or the buyer may not necessarily, for whatever reasons, PLG motion could not be deployed, and they went the SLG route. Have you started seeing a trend that they now are trying to figure out how to become self-serviceable or how to
yes.
enable activation? Is that
Yeah.
trend shifting from SLG to PLG now? Or is that still far away?
No, it's absolutely happening now, and for the reasons I mentioned, but also to deal with expansion. I think most of the attention on PLG has been around new customer acquisition, but I would argue that when you have paying customers who are trapped, if you will, then it's much easier to figure out how they adapt it. Are they using it against what use cases are they using it, and which cohorts are ripe for expansion? And if I'm doing the right thing and capturing the right data, that should be easier for me to do than the new customer acquisition side. But yeah, it is very common to talk to relatively early stage companies that started sales led and are now saying, how do I augment that? Not necessarily how do I replace it. Although the corollary to this, and this is true for big companies as well, is if you're going after enterprise accounts and now you want to go after, what do you ever want to call it, commercial SME accounts, then PLG is like the de facto way to go after that. So that's where, assuming you have the right product, can be and should be automated, more hands-off, less expensive to manage, all that kind of stuff.
Would you be able to maybe share some examples on any large SLG company, public or private, that you can publicly share, who have been successful in SLG, and in the last maybe year or two, they've enabled themselves to either self-service or the PLG motions in general?
Yeah, I'll give you one, depends how you want to define large, but as a good example, we had done a case study on the company Demandbase, who's in the ABM space.
Yep,
they were entirely sales-led until maybe a year and a half ago. And what they wanted to do was pursue the SME market. And they did that and are doing that with a PLG motion. And they're doing a lot of the things that we've talked about here on the way to that. ThoughtSpot, analytics company, who we've also done a case study on, same kind of thing, took on a PLG motion and cut their sales cycle time in half. And a disproportionate number of their customers now came through free trial. I'm not going to give you a lot of detail, but Cisco and IBM publicly have come out and said, yes, some chunk of our revenue and certain of our products are going to be put in a PLG motion. A lot of that's still baking. They're also figuring that out. And there are others, but those are good examples of traditional sales-led companies across a size spectrum that are looking at PLG to basically make things go faster and be more competitive in market.
Yeah, I'm aware of Demandbase and ThoughtSpot. In fact, I was so surprised to have ThoughtSpot have a PLG motion. One of my colleagues and I, we were actually figuring out if there's an analytics product that we could use previously, and ThoughtSpot had sales guys come out at us the moment we downloaded the white paper and stuff like that. But now they've enabled it to go at least find value or some value directly as well. Let me do a few more rapid fire questions. Okay, maybe this next question is about PLG versus self-serve. What do you think? Are they same? Are they different? Is PLG bigger and does that contain self-serve? Or is self-serve bigger and that includes PLG? What do you think?
Yeah, I think PLG is, and that's why I use the term PLG tactic. I think the notion of PLG is bigger, and certainly we can talk about a product-led company in addition to a product-led go-to-market motion, and those are two different things. But yeah, the first conversation I have with most clients is a semantics conversation, and it's that you do not need to be 100% self-serve to employ a PLG go-to-market, and it's because of that product audience combination that I mentioned. So, and that's also why I use the term product experience. So if that first introduction with a customer is through that product experience, congratulations, you're a PLG company, or a PLG go-to-market company, I should say.
That's beautiful. Hey, growth operators, many of you have been saying the otherwise. Please do listen to David. So, David, we are almost out of time. We have about a minute or so to close on. I know that we have a lot of listeners who are early stage startups, a lot of growth marketeers from Series A, Series B companies. We went ahead and checked on LinkedIn and found out if there are any questions for you. There are two or three questions that came out. The first one is if there's an early stage startup and they have been a PLG first company or a PLG native company, they have been very encouraged with a lot of signups, but they don't see the revenue. Should they continue the path or should they go figure out a way to go an SLG motion parallelly as well? Of course, constraints are probably around investments or
Yeah.
raising money, raising capital, and so on and so forth. What would be your advice on that?
Yeah, I think you have to do a little triage on why that is or isn't happening. And the first counsel I would give is patience. There are a lot of companies and executives and board members in a lot of companies that say, hey, the PLG's been the motion for a quarter. How come things aren't working? Guess what? It takes longer than that. In my view, it takes at least 6 months for the motion to start to take hold. And that assumes that the company is doing enough on awareness and driving demand and all of that, which many of them don't because of the marketing spend stuff we talked about. So that's one issue. But if you are doing all that and you're still not seeing conversions, then I think you have to look at what do you know about the people that are in the trial, in the freemium, or open source or whatever. Do you know what they're doing? Do you know when they're doing it? Are they seeing value? One of the elemental problems that I see is, and this is true of free trials or sandboxes, is lack of guidance. I believe you must lead the users to see the value you want them to see. You can't dump them into a trial and hope that they're going to do the right thing. And that happens way too often, which is why there are so many trial dropouts or repeats, or it's one reason anyway. So yeah, so those are some of the things I would think of.
Okay. So to the listeners, if you are in that particular category, don't give up. It looks like that's David's advice. Look into your ICP, look at what the usage might be, and see if these are the candidates for you to close. David, I have one last question. This question has been repeated at least three times by three different listeners to our previous podcast. This question is about large enterprise SaaS companies who have been very successful in SLG. They have sales engineers, sales associates, SDRs, lots and lots of investment in the sales led space. What are the two or three tactics that you could maybe advise them on how to get started with PLG?
So I think I'd back into it saying the job number one is reduce friction for your buyers, and then recognize that an account is comprised of buyers on a buying team and users. And it's going to be just as important, if you can, given your product, to win advocates among those users in a PLG fashion as it is to help convince the buyers that they're going to achieve the business outcomes that they want to achieve. You must, in my view, if you're a large SaaS, any size SaaS company, but you must consider PLG tactics, and you have to consider them in light of your audience, your product. But don't wait. Start doing it, start figuring out what the right product experience is. But you also have to invest in the data infrastructure to say, hey, when I have this free offer out there, or even interactive demos are good because they give off intent data, let's call it. But particularly when I have a free offer out there, you have to know what the users are doing. And especially for a freemium product, they're riding around on your dollar. You have to know how many, which account, which cohorts in the account, what have they done? Have they seen value? Are they a PQL? Are they a PQA? And take action. That's the thing that is missing from so many instances. And I think large companies have more wherewithal to make the investment to do it. And I'm actually seeing that. We'll see how it bears out over the course of the year.
Okay. So I was taking notes. So maybe these three or four things you're advising, right? The first one is figure out how you can bring value to self-serve customers as long as you're able to bring them to your portal. Could be interactive demos, could be some kind of free trials, freemiums, and so forth. The second one that you advise is invest in the PLG infrastructure, understand the usage patterns around it before you jump into even free pricing plans or go all hog on the PLG space. Anything else that you would advise?
Yeah, one is your product has to, irrespective of complexity of the product and all of that, you should have a product that can land and expand easily and that can be packaged and priced accordingly. So that may mean some re-architecture, and a lot of companies are doing that. Second is no fear. You show your pricing, ungate your content. Don't hide the trial. Large companies are reticent to do that. Sales teams in large companies are fearful that their revenue is going to be consumed or they'll lose their opportunity. They won't, but they have to be brought along. So the other important thing is this is all hands on deck motion. Cross-functional is a bit trite to say, but you have to have executive buy-in, sales buy-in, marketing, engineering, product. Everybody's got to be on that same page and have the patience to stick with it and do all the things that we mentioned.
That's amazing. Maybe we can close out on the cross-group buy-in across your company. There's a lot to chew about, especially for successful SLG company. And maybe we can do a follow-up sometime, David, around how to essentially transition from PLG first or PLG native to add SLG, maybe sometime later, a couple of months later, we can probably do a follow-up. But thank you, David. It's been a wonderful learning experience on this particular podcast, and keep sharing a lot of insights on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Guraj. Thanks for the opportunity. And we'll see you all out there on social.
Okay, take care.